You're at Lake Rant, where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons want me to rant about. You can get one of these by being one of those. This one's for Spicy Salts, who says, rant about your current and past relationships with girls. What mistakes did you learn from your previous romance, and how did you grow as a person from it? How do you see your future self with your current SO, and you got any relationship advice for us Zoomers? P.S. You make my heart go doki doki. Um, I would say that the biggest thing I learned from my past relationship is to not assume that I am going to have to like change myself and make compromises just to be with somebody. Like I think that I spent so much of my life assuming that nobody would ever accept me for exactly the way I am. And it's not to say that I think that I should never, make any compromises or like, try to be somewhat um, to act against what might be my initial instincts or interests in order to do something for somebody else. But like, just I assumed that if you could like if somebody could just accept even half of me, that would be enough, and I could just change the other half. I'd be willing to succumb on some level and suppress parts of myself and ignore the differences between me and this person. So like in my past relationship, I always felt like I was holding myself back or asking permission to be myself, and if not given permission, would change. Would do things differently. And like it was kind of like I treated it like it was no big deal, but obviously I'm harboring some resentment over it, or just not being really honest with myself by allowing myself to make those kinds of changes. So um, I also realized like how important it is to at least if you don't feel exactly the same way about something, to be able to discuss it. And like in my last relationship, there was a lot of things that I disagreed with my ex about, like general worldview, like pretty heavily, I would say. We had different worldviews, but like we couldn't talk about it. Because her mentality was sort of like, well, I'm stupid, so I just don't understand, as opposed to like trying to get where I'm coming from. So like we never could like reconcile those differences. It was just kind of like, I guess we'll just agree to disagree about the way things are, and like it leads to just a lack of understanding. Like it's a conversation you've never had, and so you're always going to be thinking about that difference. Um, you know, Also overexerting myself. Like I'm not somebody who necessarily believes that everything in a relationship has to be fair. It's more about what do each of you want out of it, Like I'm willing to exert myself harder than the other person is to make the relationship work if I feel like I, get enough value out of it that it's worth the extra effort I'm putting in. But like sometimes you really have to look at it and say, okay, well, I'm putting more into this than they are. Like I'm doing more, and if it's just a matter of I am capable of doing more and they're not, that's one thing. But if it's like you could be doing more but you're not, you're like just being lazy about this relationship, then that hurts a little bit more. So I know it sounds like I'm mostly just like blaming everything on her, but I mean, I guess the biggest problem I see in myself is that I was very dishonest. That I just would just not be forthright about my emotions. And that's a problem I have in general. It's difficult for me to tell people, if I have a problem with them, especially if I think that their feelings will be hurt easily. And I'm obviously not somebody who should even be with someone whose feelings can get hurt so easily that any criticism is going to be more than they can handle, or like make them feel really depressed. Like for me, being with a depressed person is not a good idea, because I'm such an ambitious person. I'm somebody who's always like trying to push through everything. Like if you tell me that something's wrong, I'm going to try to give you advice on how to fix it. And if you're not really interested in fixing it, then I'm just going to be frustrated. And that was how a lot of our relationship was. So those are all the things I learned in that past one. And getting into my next relationship, I was a lot more cautious, because like my first relationship I just jumped into because I had not had a girlfriend. I was like 22 and, you know, had never had a girlfriend before. So I was just like the first girl who spoke to me and asked and basically was like, yeah, I want to be with you. I just jumped on it and then I clung to it because even though there were all these warning signs and I felt like it definitely wasn't going to last, I tried to believe that it would last, and I convinced myself that it was something long term just because I didn't think I would ever be able to find anything else. You know, it was like, oh, this is the one person who's ever come out and tried to get with me, so, you know, that's what I have to go with, even though, like, I never really made any attempt on my own part to be with somebody, you know. So, like, from that point forward, I was much just more like cautious and willing to, you know, turn people down and just be like, if it's not someone who I think is going to be good for me, then I'm not going to bother, you know? And so getting with May, like, you know, it was a long, slow process of us, like, Snapchatting with each other and, like, me not trying to jump into anything at all, you know? Like, it was just basically like very minimal communication where we were kind of getting to know little elements about each other, and then once we were in the same place and finally able to like figure out, is this going to be a relationship, it was like everything is on the table right from the get-go. Like, I'm asking all the questions about like, what do you want, what are we, you know, what are we going for, like, what is acceptable. Let's make sure before we even start this that we're on the same page about what we want from this and that it's going to be good for both of us going forward, you know. And it has been so far. We don't have any problems in our relationship, really. Nothing serious, nothing that makes me feel like, oh, this is like brewing under the surface, because, like, again, we try to bring all that to the forefront immediately. If anything is a problem, then it needs to be talked about. And you know, again, we tried to run through as much of that as possible right from the beginning, so there wouldn't be any misunderstandings going forward. You know, so yeah, that's what my advice would be: is find, you know, don't be desperate. Basically, like, it's not, if you just want to have the experience of having had a relationship, which I do think is valuable, rush into something and don't expect it to last. You know, like, don't expect your first relationship to be your last relationship. Don't expect that just because you get with somebody means you have to, you know, treat it like this is forever. You know, go into it with that hope. High hopes, low expectations, as I say about everything, you know. But if something's bad, don't continue. You know, if you think, if you have an inkling that this isn't going to work out long term, don't continue pursuing it. You know, come to an end. And, you know, not to say that you can't work through anything. There are times when it's better to work through something, but, you know, you should always keep in mind that, like, you have the future, that there's more possibilities, that there's other people, and it might seem like that person is nowhere to be found, but, again, there's always tomorrow. There's always the future, you know? Like, it was almost 4 years between my two relationships. There were other prospects that I declined, you know, like, that there were people who were interested in me that I was like, this is not going, no, like, this won't work out at all. So, you know, I basically passed until something came along that I was like, oh, this is actually good, you know, this is an actually good relationship prospect, let's pursue this. And I've continued to do so because it's continued to be good. So yeah, find something good, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.